I remember it like it was yesterday, the day my world turned upside down. I'd just gotten home, the house was quiet, too quiet. There it was, her phone, buzzing with a message that wasn't meant for my eyes. But I saw it clear as day. Miss you already, can't wait to see you again. My heart sank, I knew that message wasn't for me. I waited, pacing around the living room like a caged animal until she walked through the door. She was all smiles until she saw the look on my face. What's wrong? She asked, but she knew. She could see it in my eyes, the betrayal I felt. I held up her phone, the message still glowing on the screen. Care to explain this? I could barely keep my voice steady. The color drained from her face. She stammered, tried to grab the phone, but I was faster. It's not what you think, she whispered. But we both knew that was a lie. Then came the tears, the sobbing confessions of an affair. Felt like a bad dream. And just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, she dropped another bombshell. I'm pregnant, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My mind raced. The life we'd built together, the trust, it was all shattered in an instant. She tried calling him her lover, but he was gone, vanished into thin air. No answers, just a cold, empty line. It dawned on me that he'd left her to deal with the mess they'd made. I was furious not just at her but at him, at the whole damn situation. As I looked at her, crying and broken, a dark thought crept into my mind. Revenge. It was a poisonous thought, but it took root. I knew what I had to do. It was crazy, but in that moment it made perfect sense. I was going to get back at her in the most unimaginable way possible. My decision was clear, my resolve firm. I was going to turn our already chaotic world upside down. And that's exactly what I set out to do. So there I was at this painfully dull family gathering, trying to act normal while my mind was a hurricane of revenge and hurt. And then she walked in, my wife's sister, Laura. I never really paid much attention to her before, but that day she seemed different. Maybe it was the way she laughed or the way the light hit her hair, but something about her caught my eye. We started talking, just casual chit-chat at first. But as the evening wore on, I found myself flirting, something I hadn't done in years. And the crazy thing? She was flirting back. It was like we were in our own little world, and for a moment I forgot about my wife's betrayal. We agreed to meet up a few days later, just the two of us. I told myself it was just for a drink, just to talk. But deep down I knew it was more than that. We met at this quiet little bar on the outskirts of town. It felt secretive, like we were both actors in some sort of drama. As we sat there sipping our drinks, Laura leaned in close. I've always liked you, you know, she whispered. Her words sent a jolt through me. It was madness, but in that instant I wanted her. I drove home that night with my mind racing. My wife, oblivious to it all, asked how the night went. Fine, I muttered, avoiding her gaze. I could tell she knew something was up, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. The next few days were a blur. I kept meeting Laura, each encounter more intense than the last. And then one night, as we lay together in the dim glow of a cheap motel room, I made up my mind. I was going to do it. I was going to get Laura pregnant. It was the perfect revenge. My wife had betrayed me, and now I would betray her in the worst possible way. With her own sister. The plan was twisted, but it made perfect sense in my head. Laura was all for it, caught up in the heat of the moment. As I lay there in the dark, listening to Laura's steady breathing, I couldn't help but wonder what I had become. I was no longer the man I once was, the man my wife had married. I was something else, something darker. But there was no turning back now. The plan was in motion, and I was going to see it through no matter the cost. I never thought I'd be the guy sneaking around, but here I am, meeting Laura in secret, every chance we get. It's like we're hooked on this thrill of the forbidden, and I can't seem to stop. She's everything my wife isn't right now, passionate, eager, alive with desire. And me? I'm just a guy lost in the middle of an affair I never planned. Meanwhile, back at home, it's like living with a ghost. My wife, she's there but not really. She moves through the days, quiet, withdrawn. I can tell she feels it, the growing chasm between us, but she doesn't know the half of it. Sometimes I catch her looking at me, her eyes searching for something, maybe the man she married. But he's long gone. Then out of nowhere he shows up. The lover. Mr. Perfect, who blew up my life and then skipped town. He's on our doorstep, looking haggard, desperate. My wife, she goes from sad to furious in a heartbeat. She's yelling, demanding answers, and I'm just standing there, watching it all unfold. He's babbling some nonsense about being in trouble, needing help. I don't buy it. Sounds like a con man sob story. But my wife, she's listening, and I can see something in her eyes, a flicker of the old her. She's always had a soft spot for lost causes. I can't help but wonder what his game is. Why come back now? And then it hits me. He's scared. He's not here for her. He's here because he's got nowhere else to go. It makes me sick, seeing him weasel his way back into her life, playing the victim. The whole scene's a mess. My wife torn between anger and this misguided need to fix things. The lover spilling his guts about some trouble he's gotten himself into. And me, the husband, standing in the shadows wondering how the hell my life got so twisted. I keep seeing Laura, our affair becoming more reckless by the day. It's like we're both trying to outrun reality. Get lost in this fantasy where we don't have to face the consequences of our actions. But reality has a way of catching up, and I'm starting to feel the weight of it all pressing down on me. The lover's still around, sticking to my wife like a bad smell. She's trying to help him fix whatever mess he's in. Part of me wants to laugh at the absurdity of it all. The other part, the part that used to love her, it's breaking bit by bit. I lie in bed at night, next to a woman who's become a stranger, and I wonder where it all went wrong. Was it the moment I decided to take revenge? Or was it earlier, when I stopped seeing her for who she was and started seeing only her betrayal? The affair, the lover's return, my wife's loneliness, it's all spinning out of control. And I'm right in the center of it, trying to hold on to something, anything that makes sense. But the truth is, nothing makes sense anymore. Not the affair, not my marriage, not this life I've somehow created. It's like I'm walking a tightrope, and any moment now I'm going to fall. And the crazy part? I'm not sure I even care anymore. Just when I thought things couldn't get more twisted, life threw a curveball that knocked the wind out of me. The lover, the guy my wife was sneaking around with, turns out he's my long-lost brother. Yeah, you heard that right. My brother. The shock of it hit me like a freight train. How? Why? Questions swirled in my head, making it hard to think straight. The whole family was in turmoil. My parents, who'd always lamented my brother's disappearance, were suddenly faced with his return, but not in any way they'd imagined. And me? I felt like I was living in some messed up soap opera. The guy the first hated, the one who'd wrecked my marriage, was my own flesh and blood. My wife, she was a mess of emotions. Guilt, confusion, regret, it was written all over her face. She kept saying she didn't know, that if she had, she would have never. But words felt empty, like echoes in a hollow room. Then, as if things couldn't get any more complicated, Laura dropped her bombshell. She was pregnant. With my child. The silence that followed her announcement was deafening. It was like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the world to implode. The pregnancy news was like gasoline on a fire. Tensions that had been simmering beneath the surface boiled over. We all sat down for a family dinner, a pathetic attempt at normalcy, but it didn't take long for things to unravel. The dinner table became a battlefield. Accusations flew, old wounds reopened. My wife, looking more lost than ever, tried to speak, but words failed her. Laura, defiant yet scared, clutched at her belly as if to protect her unborn child from the chaos around her. My parents, caught in the middle of this family catastrophe, looked on with a disbelief. And there across from me sat my brother, the man I should have grown up with, shared life's ups and downs with. Instead, he was just a stranger, wearing a familiar face. The tension escalated until voices were raised, and harsh truths spilled out. It was ugly. All the pent-up anger and hurt pouring out in a torrent of bitter words. I wanted to scream, to tell them all to stop, that this wasn't what a family should be. But the words stuck in my throat. In that moment, I saw the destruction I'd caused. My revenge, my affair with Laura, it wasn't just about me and my wife anymore. It had spiraled out, touching everyone I cared about. The realization was a slap in the face. I'd been so caught up in my own pain, my own desire for revenge, that I'd failed to see the bigger picture. As the evening wore on, the arguments faded into exhausted silence. We were a family in ruins, each of us lost in our own tangled web of emotions. I looked around at the broken faces of my family, and wondered how we'd ever put the pieces back together. That night I lay awake, the weight of my choices pressing down on me. The mess I'd made seemed insurmountable. And the worst part? I knew there was no easy way out. No quick fixes. We were all trapped in this nightmare, and I couldn't help but feel it was all my fault. Life's funny, you know? One minute you're set on a path, sure of everything, and the next it's like you're in a free fall. That's how I felt when I finally told my wife it was over. I couldn't keep living this lie. Not with Laura carrying my child and everything else in shambles. My wife, she didn't take it lying down. She started doing everything she could think of to win me back. Cooked my favorite meals, wore the dress I used to like, tried to talk about the good times. It was heartbreaking, really. But my heart wasn't in it anymore. Every time I looked at her, all I could see were the lies and the betrayal. Then there's my brother, if I can even call him that. He came to me, hat in hand, looking for some brotherly bond or understanding. He told me about our rough childhood, the things he went through after he disappeared. It was a sob story, all right, but I couldn't find it in me to feel sorry for him. He ruined my marriage, and that's not something I can easily forget. The weirdest part of this whole mess? My wife and him, they started getting close. Not in a romantic way, but like two people who've been through the same storm. They'd sit and talk for hours, sharing stories, finding comfort in their mutual pain. It was a bizarre alliance, watching the two people who hurt me the most find solace in each other. Meanwhile, Laura was in her own little world of joy. The pregnancy suited her, brought a glow to her face. We'd meet up, talk about names, about how we'd raise our kid. It was a slice of normal in an otherwise upside-down world. But even those moments were tinged with guilt. Every smile, every plan for the future. I couldn't shake off the feeling that it was built on a foundation of hurt and betrayal. I tried to focus on Laura, on the baby, but it was like walking through a fog of regret. My wife's desperate attempts to win me back, my brother's pleas for understanding, Laura's happiness, it was a tangled web, and I was stuck right in the middle. It's strange, you know, how life takes these turns. How decisions you make, thinking they're for the best, end up turning your world on its head. I thought I wanted revenge, thought it would make me feel better, but all it did was create more pain, more complications. At night I'd lie awake, wondering how it all got so messed up. My wife alone in our bed, trying to piece together a broken marriage. My brother trying to atone for a lifetime of mistakes. Laura carrying my child, oblivious to the chaos she'd helped create. And me? I was just a guy caught in the eye of a storm I'd helped conjure, trying to figure out how to move forward when every step felt like I was sinking deeper into quicksand. Life's funny like that, always throwing curveballs when you least expect them. And there I was, trying to catch them with my hands tied behind my back. In the thick of all this madness, I guess I wanted clarity, or maybe I just wanted to feel in control again. So I told my wife straight up, this is it. You decide now. It's him or me. I expected tears, a breakdown maybe. But she just stood there, pale like I'd knocked the wind out of her. The next few days she was like a ghost, trying to stitch together what was left of us. I saw it in her eyes, the desperation. She was scrambling for ways to fix things, but deep down I think we both knew it was too late. The damage was done. Then things took a darker turn. My so-called brother, his past finally caught up with him. Some guys he'd messed with showed up looking for payback. I heard the commotion from the other room, shouts, the sound of a scuffle. By the time I got there it was chaos. That night, as if our lives needed more drama, someone broke into our house. It was like some bad movie, but it was real. Too real. The intruder, probably one of my brother's enemies, was searching for something. Tearing the place apart. My wife, she tried to stop him playing the hero, but it went south real fast. There was a struggle and she got hurt. I heard her scream, a sound that'll haunt me for the rest of my days. I rushed in, managed to scare the guy off, but the damage was done. She was lying there, hurt and scared, and for a moment all our problems seemed so small. I forgot about the affair, the betrayal, everything. All I could see was her, the woman I once promised to protect, now injured because of this twisted web we'd all woven. The ambulance came, the police too. Questions were asked that I hardly remember what was said. My mind was stuck on her, on the look of fear in her eyes when that intruder grabbed her. Sitting in the hospital waiting for news, I felt a wave of regret. This mess, it wasn't just about me and my bruised ego anymore. It had spiraled into something dangerous, something that could have cost us much more than our marriage. I couldn't help but think about how it all started. A simple affair that blew up into this nightmare. And there I was in the middle of it, wondering how a quest for revenge led to my wife lying in a hospital bed. The doctor said she'd be okay, just some cuts and bruises, but I knew the scars would run deeper than that. We'd both be scarred, in ways that wouldn't just heal with time. That night, sitting by her hospital bed watching her sleep, I realized how far I'd strayed from the man I used to be, the man she married. I was lost in this maze of anger and revenge, and I dragged everyone I cared about down with me. It was a wake-up call loud and clear. But the question that kept gnawing at me was, is it too late? Too late to fix things, too late to go back to who we were. I guess some questions don't have easy answers. But one thing was certain, this was a turning point one way or another. The hospital corridors echoed with the sound of my footsteps as I paced back and forth, a mix of anxiety and anger churning inside me. My wife, lying in that sterile hospital room, was a vivid reminder of how far we'd all strayed from the path. In the midst of this chaos, secrets began to unravel, like threads pulled from a delicate fabric. The lover, my long-lost brother, finally confessed. It wasn't just infidelity. He admitted to crimes from his past, things that made my blood run cold. He talked about debts, about running from people who weren't keen on letting things slide. He wasn't just a cheater, he was a criminal. Hearing his confession, something inside me snapped. I confronted him right there in the hospital, not caring who heard. "How could you?" I shouted, my voice echoing off the walls. "You come back into our lives and you bring this chaos with you." His eyes, full of regret, didn't calm the storm inside me. I was beyond furious. I wanted to shake him, to make him understand the pain he'd caused. Meanwhile, Laura, my sister-in-law, was having her own crisis. The pregnancy, the affair, it was all crashing down on her. She confided in me, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I did the right thing." I could see the doubt in her eyes, the fear. What had started as a reckless affair was now a reality she wasn't sure she could handle. And then there was my wife. After the doctors tended to her, she had a moment of clarity. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a sad understanding. "I played a part in this," she whispered. "I pushed you away, I ignored what we had." Her admission was a gut punch. Despite everything, a part of me still cared for her, still remembered the good times before all this mess. The hospital drama, the confessions, the doubts, it was like watching the final pieces of our life together crumble away. I sat there in a hard plastic chair, staring at the white hospital walls, and it all hit me. The affair, the revenge, the anger, it hadn't solved anything. It only served to tear apart what was left of us. In the silence of that hospital room, with the beeping of machines and the distant sound of nurses' footsteps, I felt a profound sense of loss. Loss of my marriage, loss of what could have been with Laura, loss of the family I once had. The revelations, the confrontations, they didn't bring any relief. Instead, they left a bitter taste, a realization of how much damage we'd all done to each other. Sitting there in the dim light of the hospital, I wondered if there was any way back from this, or if we were all too far gone. The web of lies, the hurt, the betrayal, it was all laid bare, leaving us exposed and vulnerable in the face of our own brokenness. The hospital waiting room turned into a battleground that day. Words were thrown like grenades, each one exploding with years of pent-up frustration and pain. It was all out in the open now, the affair, the lies, the betrayal. My wife, her eyes red from crying, her voice hoarse from yelling, was a portrait of despair. Then the cops showed up. My brother, the lover, the cause of all this mess, they cuffed him right there. Turns out, those crimes he confessed to were more serious than any of us thought. Watching him being led away, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief that his poisonous influence was gone. Sadness for the brother I never really knew. Laura, my sister-in-law, the other woman in this twisted tale, she had her own bombshell to drop. She was leaving town, she said. The baby, our baby, it was all too much for her. She couldn't bear the weight of the scandal, the looks, the whispers. I couldn't blame her, but it felt like another piece of my world slipping away. Then there was me, standing amidst the wreckage of my own making. The anger and the need for revenge that had driven me, it seemed so pointless now. I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and for the first time I saw the damage I'd done. I'd pushed her into another man's arms, driven her sister away, ruined what little family I had left. I wanted to say something, to apologize, to try and fix things. But what could I say? Sorry I slept with your sister? Sorry I broke our vows? It all sounded so hollow. I felt the weight of my choices, heavy on my shoulders, a burden I'd carry for the rest of my life. My wife, once the center of my world, now a stranger, she sat there all alone. Everyone had left her, me, her lover, her sister. She was the eye of this storm, calm, yet surrounded by destruction. I wanted to reach out to offer some kind of comfort, but I knew it was too late. I crossed a line and there was no going back. That day, in the sterile cold of the hospital, I realized the true cost of my actions. It wasn't just a marriage that was broken, it was lives, it was trust, it was the future. I walked out of that hospital a man full of remorse, unsure of where to go or what to do next. My wife, left behind in that room, her world shattered, was a reminder of the love we once had. A love I tossed away in a fit of rage and hurt. As I stepped into the dim light of the hallway, the reality of my solitude hit me. I was alone, truly alone, and it was all my own doing. When my brother's trial started, it was like opening a Pandora's box. The courtroom was packed, everyone eager to witness the downfall of a man who'd become the town's latest scandal. The prosecutor laid out his crimes: fraud, theft, a list that seemed to go on forever. I sat there, listening to the litany of his misdeeds, feeling a mix of disgust and pity. This was my flesh and blood, but he was a stranger to me. His life a series of bad choices that had finally caught up to him. As the trial unfolded, so did our private lives, splashed across the local news like some sordid soap opera. Our neighbors, friends, even strangers, they all had their opinions, their judgments. We were pariahs, outcasts in our own community. I could see the toll it was taking on my wife. She tried to hold her head high, but I saw the hurt in her eyes, the embarrassment. Then came the blow that knocked the wind out of her sails. My wife lost her job. The scandal was too much for her employer, and just like that, she was out of work. I watched as she struggled to cope with this new reality, the humiliation, the uncertainty. It was more than just a job. It was her identity, her independence, and it had been stripped away because of our collective mistakes. Laura, my sister-in-law, she couldn't handle it anymore. One day she just packed up and left. No advice, no defensa. Just a note saying she needed to start over. I understood, but it felt like another piece of my life slipping away. The woman carrying my child gone, maybe for good. That's when I made my decision. I couldn't stay here in this town with all its memories and judging eyes. I needed a fresh start, away from the chaos I'd helped create. So I packed my bags, sold what little I had left, and left. Left my home, my wife, the life we'd built together. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was necessary. A clean break from a past that was suffocating me. My wife, she was left to deal with the aftermath alone. Financially and emotionally, she was in ruins. The house, our home, it was just another casualty of our shattered lives. She had to let it go, move somewhere smaller, cheaper. I heard about it from mutual friends, each update like a stab to my already guilty heart. Then out of the blue, an old friend visited her. Someone from happier times, someone who reminded her of who she used to be. I wasn't there, but I heard it gave her some comfort. A brief respite from the loneliness that had become her constant companion. The final straw was when she came to say goodbye. She stood on my doorstep, a shadow of the woman I'd married. We didn't say much. What was there to say? It was a farewell filled with regret, with what ifs and if onlys. I watched her drive away, knowing it was the last time I'd see her. Alone in my new place, I thought about her, about all of it. The love we'd shared, the life we'd built, and how I'd let my need for revenge destroy it all. I reflected on my choices, each one leading me further down a path I never intended to take. In the end, my wife was left to face a future that looked nothing like she'd planned. Alone, full of regrets, a life upended by mistakes, both hers and mine. We'd both reached the end of the line, but in very different ways. And as I sat there staring at the empty walls of my new life, I couldn't help but wonder, was it all worth it? The affair, the revenge, the pain we caused each other? The answer was as clear as it was painful. No, it wasn't worth it. Not by a long shot.